A very good evening to you. It's 7 p.m. East African time, and this is Black Hot Fire News at 7. We start with sad news from Congo, of course. Dozens of people have been killed in Congo as two boats collided on the River Congo. Dozens of people are reported dead and many others missing after two boats collided on the Congo River near Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo on Monday. In scenic images seen by Black Hot Fire moments after the crash, horrified residents could be seen watching from the riverbank as small boats raced out in a bid to rescue passengers. It is not yet clear how many people died from the accident, but the number is suspected to be very high.
Two boats collided on the Congo River near Kinshasa in the Democratic Republic of Congo on Monday. Horrified residents watched as various small boats attempted to rescue passengers as the bigger vessels sank beneath the water. The produce and people spread out across the surface. Locals tried to fish them out of what is believed to be the world's deepest river. Officials say dozens of people are dead and several others are missing after the boats, loaded with passengers and goods, crashed into one another. It was not immediately clear what caused the accident. Rivers are key to transport in the vast Central African country, which has an extremely poor road infrastructure. Deadly boating accidents occur frequently, as crews on the mostly unregulated small wooden boats often overload the vessels.
That video was courtesy of African News, and today it looks like we have a lot of sad stories today. A lot of sad things have happened today. So moving on to Egypt, another sad incident happened in Egypt, where at least 15 people have been confirmed dead in a road accident in Alexandria. A truck crashed into several passenger vehicles in the Mediterranean province of Alexandria, Egypt, killing at least 15 people and injuring many more. The injury, which occurred late on Tuesday in the district of Amrea, west of the city of Alexandria, happened after a truck crashed into four microbuses. One microbus overturned and the other caught fire. Accidents claim thousands of lives in Egypt every year. For example, in October last year, a passenger bus collided head-on with a parked vehicle on a motorway linking Alexandria to the capital Cairo, killing at least 32 people.
A passenger bus slammed into a parked vehicle on Saturday morning on a highway linking the Egyptian capital, Cairo, and the Mediterranean city of Alexandria, killing at least 32 people, authorities said. The multi-car pileup, which a passenger bus slammed into a parked vehicle on Saturday morning on a highway linking the Egyptian capital, Cairo, and the Mediterranean city of Alexandria, killing at least 32 people, authorities said. The multi-car pileup, which set some vehicles ablaze, left at least 63 others injured, the health ministry announced. Ambulances rushed to the scene of the crash on the Cairo-Alexandria Desert Road to transport the injured to nearby hospitals. Local media reported that the bus was on its way to Cairo when it hit the parked vehicle. Other cars slammed into the bus. Footage circulating online showed many burned vehicles on the side of the road, with firefighters extinguishing the fire. The Egyptian Meteorological Authority warned of heavy fog on highways a day earlier, according to local reports. Deadly traffic accidents claim thousands of lives every year in Egypt, which has a poor transportation safety record.
That video is also courtesy of African News, and 15 people died from the accident, and the earlier accident had claimed 32 lives. Both of the accidents happened in Alexandria, and both of the accidents involved public transport. So, condolences to the people of Egypt who are mourning the deaths of 15 people and many, many others injured. Moving on to Ethiopia with yet another very, very sad update. Ethiopian forces killed at least 45 citizens in Amhara, according to reports. Ethiopian Federal Security Forces are said to have killed at least 45 civilians in a massacre in Amhara State in late January. Reports from Ethiopian Human Rights Commission, the AFRCA, said that they had identified the identity of 45 civilians who were extrajudicially killed by government security forces for allegedly supporting the ethnic Amhara group Fano. The human rights group emphasized that the number could even be higher as they had not concluded their investigations. The killings in Amhara town of Merawi follow months of clashes last year between Ethiopia's military and Fano, which is the self-defense organization with no publicly known command structure that draws volunteers from the local population. The fighting made the local government impose a state of emergency in August that was later extended by 4 months this year. The Amharan violence is the most serious crisis since a peace agreement was signed in November 2022 to end a 2-year conflict in the neighboring region of Tigray.
The massacre that the Ethiopian government is calling a crime against humanity. According to an Amnesty International report, an estimated 600 civilians were stabbed, strangled, and bludgeoned to death on November 9th in the Tigrayan town of Mai Kadra. The rights organization says the culprits are obvious.
There was a battle, not in the town, but outside of the town, and the security forces loyal to the Tigray regional government, they lost the battle, so they retreated to the town, and that was immediately followed by this massacre.
Since then, the country's state-appointed Human Rights Commission was able to travel to Mai Kadra, where it witnessed firsthand dead bodies rotting in the sun and dozens of mass graves. It appears the victims were pre-identified by ethnicity.
They have personally visited the crime scene, a mass grave scene. So we've been able to get detailed accounts of what has transpired in Mai Kadra directly from the victims and their families.
The official government report blames the Tigrayan youth group as well as local police and militia. But survivors who fled the town say pro-government forces were responsible for the killings. All, though, agree on one thing. It was the Amhara residents who were targeted. The UN and human rights groups have called for an impartial investigation into the massacre, but a communications blackout and restrictions on movement make it impossible in the short term.
That video was from a different massacre, but the massacre that I'm reporting about is the Amharan violence that happened, where 45 civilians are reported to have been killed by security personnel in Ethiopia. And I'll now share a video of the recent massacre. There has been so many massacres in Ethiopia that it is now even confusing as to which massacre happened. So the current one was the Amharan violence, where more than 45 civilians were killed by security forces in Ethiopia. This video is courtesy of African News.
The town of Merawi in Ethiopia's northern Amhara region. The country's human rights watchdog says at least 45 people were killed here during door-to-door raids by federal security forces in late January. Both the United States and the European Union have called for an investigation into the killings. They come after months of clashes last year between the military and Fano militia, a so-called self-defense organization that draws volunteers from the local population. While the federal government has not commented on the latest killings, the fighting last year prompted it to impose a state of emergency in the region. Amhara violence was Ethiopia's most serious crisis since the end of fighting in the neighboring region of Tigray in 2022. Kanu had been an ally of the troops at that war, began a rebellion against government plans to disarm them.
So the members of the public were allegedly killed for supporting the ethnic Amhara armed group that is called Fano, that is fighting against government forces. So the killings were as a retaliation from the government forces who felt like the, the, the locals were supporting their enemies. And moving on, ECOWAS chair Bola Tinubu is set to meet Senegalese President Macky Sall over postponed elections. Nigeria's President Bola Tinubu is set to meet his Senegalese counterpart Macky Sall on Monday in the capital Dakar as a constitutional crisis continues there over postponement of elections that were initially scheduled for this month. Tinubu, who is also chair for Economic Community of West African States ECOWAS, is visiting days after the bloc's foreign minister held talks to discuss Senegal in Nigeria's capital, Abuja. Macky Sall's decision to postpone the February 25th elections has plunged Senegal into one of its worst crises since independence from France in 1960. ECOWAS has urged Senegal, one of its most stable members, to return to its election timetable, but critics are questioning the bloc's influence and power over member states. Sall's postponement of the election over what he called Sall postponed the elections over what he called a dispute between the parliament and the Constitutional Council over potential candidates barred from running. He said that he will begin a process of reconciliation between the two bodies, that is the parliament and the Constitutional Council. Senegal's parliament voted to back Sall's move on Monday, and this will mean he will stay in office until his successor takes over. And now moving away from Senegal and the West Africa, France is revoking birthright citizenship in Mayotte, an overseas territory near Madagascar, in a move to curb immigration. France has announced a controversial plan to amend the constitution to restrict citizenship to people born to immigrants in the overseas territory of Mayotte in a bid to reduce immigration to the Indian Ocean islands. The move has been welcomed by a section of the citizens, but socialists argue that citizenship by birth is non-negotiable. French Interior Minister Gerald Damanin on Sunday announced that children of immigrants will now not become citizens automatically. The decision comes after weeks of protest in Mayotte, which has seen the deterioration of living conditions. Mayotte is one of the 5 overseas departments of France located in the Indian Ocean off the East African coast, comprising of 2 islands. The others in the surrounding archipelago sought independence, becoming the Comoros Island. The Muslim majority overseas territory, which voted to stay part of the French in 1974, became fully fledged French department in 2011.
He made the shock announcements the end of birthright citizenship in his French department in the Indian Ocean.
That means it will no longer be possible to become a French citizen.
And France's Interior Minister had barely touched down on Mayotte when he made the shock announcements the end of birthright citizenship in his French department in the Indian Ocean.
That means it will no longer be possible to become a French citizen if you are not the child of French parents. We will thereby cut off the attractions of the Mayotte archipelago in Japan.
As General Darmanin made his way to government buildings on Sunday morning, angry locals were rallying to demand strong action on what they say is a migrant crisis, which is causing insecurity on the islands.
Everyday people are dying because of all the criminality, the violence. We've had enough. We want concrete action now.
I believe it when it's on paper. We need a properly thought out program that tells us what's being done and when.
Mayotte lies between mainland Africa and Madagascar. People pack onto small boats from the Comoros Islands just to the northwest to reach French soil. Locals say migration is uncontrolled. Almost half the population of the capital, Mamoudzou, are migrants. The only maternity hospital on Mayotte has the highest number of births of any maternity hospital in France, and staff say most babies are born to migrants. At the same time, Mayotte is facing a crisis of violence. For several months, the main island has been peppered with barricades meant to protect against gangs of violent youths, which politicians blame on migrant camps.
They are organized. They are wearing skin masks. They have machetes. It's a network of organized mafias to destabilize the territory.
The leaders of France's main conservative and far-right parties had already proposed an end to birthright citizenship in Mayotte, which would mean a change to the constitution. Left-wing parties are doubtful.
Will Mr. Darmanin's proposed constitutional revision of birthright citizenship change anything at all in Mayotte? From this point of view, I don't think so.
The Socialist Party says the solution is to improve public services, not change the constitution, but the government plans to rush a bill in the coming months. In the meantime, a new police operation will be launched across Mayotte. France's Interior Minister had barely.
So that is the update from Mayotte, where apparently now immigrants, children of immigrants, will not become citizens in France anymore. And now they say this was in a bid to curb the immigration, the illegal migration of people to France, especially from overseas. And I can see a few people who are already watching the news with me, listening to the news. And one of them is Jiba Jaba, who says, feedback, the channel notification worked. All right. And he says, who trains these unalivers? NATO, NGOs, and he's referring to the Sudan, the Ethiopian troops who killed 45 civilians, allegedly for supporting a rebel group. So 45 civilians getting killed in a single day is not something that should be taken lightly. It is a serious thing. And of course, Jibajaba goes on to say the audacity. And moving on to even sadder news, looks like today we are only doing sad news in Africa. Very sad things have been happening all over Africa, especially this week. 3 people have been confirmed dead in a bombing attack on Congo displacement camp as violence in Congo hits a new high. A group of rebels bombed a displacement camp in eastern Congo, North Kivu region, killing 3 civilians and injuring 8 others. The rebel group, which is allegedly linked to neighboring Rwanda, bombed the Zaina camp on Monday, which is 16 miles from the city of Goma. The bombing follows days of attacks not far away from the city. The M23 rebels did not claim responsibility for the attack, but appeared to confirm on Tuesday that they were heading to the town of Sake, which is near Goma. Several organizations, including the Black Hot Fire, claim that the M23 rebel group receives funding and arming from Rwanda, although the country denies it. Thousands have fled their homes for Goma as the fighting intensifies, and hospitals in the city are filled with injured civilians, many with limited health care. More than 1 million people have been displaced from the conflict since November, adding to the 6.9 million people who had already fled their homes in one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. Angered by this, hundreds of people held protests in Congo's capital, Kinshasa, on Monday, targeting foreign embassies, accusing them of not supporting the country's bid to end the violence. And moving on to other news, let us now head to Senegal, where it is another sad story. As I said today, most of the news today are just sad news. Sad things have been happening in Africa with instability in most African countries. Yeah, so let us now head to Senegal, where authorities have restricted internet access and they have banned protests. There has been protests going on in Senegal. Senegalese authorities on Tuesday suspended mobile internet and banned a march against the delayed presidential elections, which was due to be held this month. The protests were due to be held this week. President Macky Sall's decision to postpone the elections until later this year has sparked ongoing protests across the country, with at least 3 people confirmed killed so far. So apparently, President Macky Sall, there was an election that was supposed to happen in Senegal on the 25th of February this year, but apparently, Senegalese President Macky Sall decided to postpone the elections to December, and that made people angry. And rally organizers have now postponed the marches until Saturday, saying that they want to remain within the law. And of course, as expected, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres voiced his concern on the excessive force being used to quiet the protests by the police. He reiterated that the people of Senegal had a constitutional right to demonstrate, and that the excessive force should immediately cease. He urged Senegal to hold elections as soon as possible. US Secretary of State Antony Blinken, of course, as expected, also voiced his concern, claiming to have held a long discussion with Macky Sall over his controversial decision to postpone the election. Several people have lost their lives in the ongoing protests, and many, many more have been injured.
Back here in Africa, Senegalese authorities have suspended the move of internet and banned a march against the delayed presidential elections, which were due to be held this year. This comes as President Macky Sall's abrupt decision on February 3rd to postpone the elections until later this year has sparked ongoing protests across the country, with 3 people reported killed. This pronouncement has resulted in protests, some of which have been postponed. The authorities banned one of the scheduled march, citing logistical concerns. Following this development, United Nations and human rights organizations have voiced their concern on the situation, with a spokesman for the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres calling on authorities to respect the rights of Senegalese to demonstrate peacefully. I have joining me African Affairs Analyst Patrick Coker to discuss the UN's call for the respect of human rights in Senegal. And it's not just that rights that we're discussing, we're also going to look at that pronouncement by the president. Good to have you join us.
Thank you very much.
So let's look at that the announcement which was made by Macky Sall. First, he postponed the election indefinitely, and then postponed it to the end of the year. That particular pronouncement has now plunged Senegal into a crisis. And many see this as an attempt by the president to extend his mandate. Where do you see this heading?
Thank you. This is an unfortunate development against democracy in Africa, especially a country that has been acclaimed as the most stable democratic space, and indeed very progressive.
So that was what has been happening in Senegal. Of course, the propaganda has started with them claiming Senegal to be the most democratic state, and of course, rallying calls by the UN Secretary General Guterres and Guimares and the ECOWAS, of course. So let us go to other stories and leave the propaganda alone. So we head now to DR Congo, which has been making headlines, with South Africa is set to deploy 2,900 soldiers to East DRC. In a statement released earlier this week, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa said the deployment is expected to cost South Africans 2 billion South African rands and will last until December this year. Malawi and Tanzania will also contribute troops to the mission, which is replacing the East African Regional Forces, which left DRC last December after the Congolese government deemed it ineffective. In recent weeks, violence orchestrated by the M23 rebel groups has escalated, and the rebel group has made advances towards North Kivu. But so, in case you're wondering what has been happening in Congo, there has been a massacre going on in Congo that nobody's talking about, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people getting killed. And we had the East African forces allegedly going there, the first East African troops led by the Kenya Defense Forces allegedly going there to help bring peace in DRC, but they left on December after the Congolese government deemed them ineffective. And that is why South Africa has now decided to send 2,900 troops to Congo to allegedly bring peace to Congo, a mission that is set to cost South Africans 2 billion South African rand. Malawi and Tanzania have also decided to contribute troops, and it looks like now everybody is trying to help Congo. But in real sense, we know what has been going and what has been happening. So I'll share a video of also the massacre that has been happening in Congo before I come and finish the session with the last piece of news from Somalia, where UAE soldiers were killed in Somalia.
Now, there's been shock in eastern DR Congo, the killing in Beni of 26 people in an attack that's been blamed on the ADF militia group. Now, it's been terrorizing communities in the region since the 90s, and many of the latest alleged victims are reportedly children. Our correspondent brings us more from DR Congo.
Witnesses say that armed men raided homes in one part of Arusha on Monday night. Several victims of the violence died of knife wounds. The authorities have blamed the killing on the ADF, a Ugandan armed group accused of killing thousands of civilians. The militia has pledged allegiance to Islamic State. It's been 2 years since the DRC and Uganda launched a joint military operation to try to stop the ADF's attacks. Several terrorists have since been neutralized, but the military offensive hasn't reduced the level of violence against civilians.
So that is what has been happening in Congo, with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people getting killed. And that is not the only thing that has been happening. Of course, we have been having, Congo has a lot of minerals, some of them which are used in the manufacture of cell phones and manufacture of laptops and manufacture of almost all electronics. And this happened. It happened that a few Congolese citizens decided to sue the big corporations that have been mining in Congo. And you know what happened? The US court dismissed the case, citing lack of evidence. So they said there was no evidence that kids were being used in mines and people were being killed in wars that had been orchestrated, wars that have been started deliberately to bring unrest in a region so that they can be able to steal the resources there. And that is the reason why you see each and every government is sending its troops to Congo so that they can bring peace. Nobody is really interested in the peace in Congo. They are interested in the minerals. But anyways, that was not the topic of the day. I'm here to report on the news. I'll talk more about this maybe on Saturday. And so I'll end the news with another sad update from Somalia, where bodies of UAE soldiers killed in Somalia have been returned to Abu Dhabi. The United Arab Emirates on Sunday held an honor guard ceremony in Abu Dhabi to honor their troops killed in Somalia. The soldiers, as well as a Bahraini military officer, were killed in an attack by the Al-Qaeda linked group Al-Shabaab at the General Gordon military base in the capital, Mogadishu. Somalia's President Hassan Sheikh Mohamud offered his condolences to the UAE for the loss of their troops. Al-Shabaab claimed the attack in a statement online, describing the UAE as the enemy of the Sharia law and for backing the Somali government's fight against them. The Islamic group that was formed in 2006 controls about half of Somalia's territory and at one time controlled the capital, Mogadishu. So that is all we had today. And I can see a few people had joined me for the news. And a big thank you to all of those who joined me for the news update and for all those who will watch it later. That is what has been happening throughout Africa. I covered each and every country in Africa and each and every breaking news from each and every country. That was a wrap up of what has been happening throughout Africa. And if you notice, most of the news are very, very sad, with one being the soldiers killed in Somalia, the other being the 45 people who were killed in Ethiopia, the other being the 15 people who died in an Egypt bus accident, the other being the 4 people who have been killed in Senegal's protests, and of course, Senegal banning the internet and the protests, the other one being people who died in the DRC boat accident, the other one being 8 people who died in a bombing accident also in Kinshasa. That was not 8 but 4 people who were bombed by rebels in Kinshasa. So as you've heard, most of the news have been about deaths and killings and France banning people in the island of Mayotte from being citizens anymore. So Jiba Jaba tells me there's no coverage in the United States. I think he's talking about the coverage of the massacre that is happening in DRC right now. And nobody is really talking about the massacre in DRC. We are all pretending to talk about the massacre in Israel, the massacre in Palestine. And of course, nobody is talking about what is happening in DRC, which is very, very sad. As I have reported, about 1 million people have been displaced since November, adding to the 6.9 million people who had been displaced earlier. And that is many other people have been killed by the rebels who allegedly get arming and backing from Rwanda, but Kigali continues to deny those claims. And Jiba Jaba tells me he did not know about the lawsuit that the people of Congo, some miners from Congo, decided to sue the big corporations, including Tesla and the big corporations, but the lawsuit was dismissed by a United States judge. And he tells me, good format, aggregating of news. Thank you, Jiba Jaba, and be joining me every day for 30 minutes of news. And that is it. That is all we had on the Black Hot Fires news update. I hope you enjoyed the rest of your evening if you are from Kenya, and the rest of your morning, wherever you are watching, listening from. Coming up next is Joby. It's been a pleasure.